Welcome, welcome, welcome into the Nutmeg Tavern. I've got my warm drink. I've got my nutmeg. We have burst open the doors so that you may all come in and find a seat and have fun with us today, chatting and all that good stuff. And maybe you're just watching this in replay. That's okay too. We welcome people in even if they are time travelers. As I am, because of us interacting here with the time vortex. So anyway, I'm your host John Townsend, and we're going to be talking about fun 18th century stuff. Actually, this topic is going to stretch outside of the 18th century, but don't all topics kind of do that in one sense or another. But we're going to be talking about the concepts of naming. Specifically naming people, first names, last names, where those names come from, why we have names, where do names come, why are names the way they are, and especially when we give names to children, where do those names come from? This topic does run over into other edges like the naming of locations, and all these have a very, very pertinent cultural reference to them. So different cultures deal with how they give names very differently. And it's a fascinating topic, and it helps us understand even what we're doing with names today. I don't think that many people really dig hard into why we name children or even places a particular way nowadays. But I think that people in the 18th century were much more on the ball about why names were the way they were. We can certainly see trends and characteristics within different cultures of our time period. So before I really dig in, Lauren, do we have anything we need to talk about?
Well, somebody was asking if you were all by yourself today.
No, I'm not all by myself today. Thank goodness. I forgot to say, I am joined on the other side of the time vortex by Lauren,
Hello.
who's in the chat. She's done a lot of the research for today, not doing it, basically like collating it, right? So,
But I grab it, I show it to Dad.
Right.
So and then I grab something new and I show it
right.
to him. Works
And
great.
Ivy's on the console.
Hi, everybody.
There she is. She hasn't been here for a while. She's like, how does this all work again? It's like, it's time vortex. I have no idea. You're going to have to figure it out. So a lot of the information we have scrounged up together today. And I would say, if not all the information, the inspiration for this concept is the information out of Albion's Seed here by David Hackett Fisher. You can see it is a large book. It is a wonderful book. He did such an incredible job on this book where he traces the four main English cultures that we know of coming into North America. The Puritans out of East Anglia, the sort of Cavaliers, sort of maybe a little south in England, I'm coming up with it, the Quakers coming out of the North Midlands, and then of course the Scots-Irish, or basically Scots border country people in the north there, and why the names are different. I mean, this is compared to the United States, a fairly small region, but they're very, very distinct. And those cultures get transmitted into North America, and they continue to be distinct and slowly kind of merge over time, and we get a lot of our standard culture that we're used to from, say, 50 years ago, is really an outworking of those cultures. It's been a lot more cosmopolitan. Say in the last 50 years, we see a lot of other cultures influencing the United States, but those main cultures are really kind of the foundation stone of the United States, not just their political thought and food and their clothing. And, in this circumstance, in language is very, very interesting. Even the kind of words where some of the words that we use come from, which one of those 4 strains. But we're talking about here names and specifically, when do people get named? They get named when they're children. So there's a fascinating website. Lawrence put the link down into the description. She'll probably drop it into the chat here, which is a website about baby names and the popularity of that name throughout from about 1880 to the present. And they'll rank it. You'll see when the name gets popular, and these are first names, when they get popular and when they kind of lose favor. These names are gathered from the Social Security records, so that's why 1880 is the drop-off point. So people that were born before 1880 were probably too old to ever sign up for Social Security, so they don't show up in this particular way. I don't know why that is the easiest way to grab all these names and kind of analyze them, but that's one of the best tools we've got. And they've got a great graphical tool where you can say, hey, what's popular at this time, and you can grab some fascinating data. And it's just really interesting to see what's happening with popular names throughout time period. Now, that's all the cultures put together, what's most popular. But here, it would be great if you could squeeze it down to region or state. Tell me what's the most popular name in New York versus the most popular name in Virginia. We would really start to see the data break out and do some very, very interesting things, and probably give us a backup of what we're going to find here. So
before you dive in, kind of a note on the regions. We really are focusing here on English names. And of course, as a lot of people are chiming in, there's a lot of Scots and German. And one of the interesting, and people of course mentioned names being anglicized. It's very fascinating because a lot of times you'll have a last name that is an English name that has a particular meaning. And at times people will say, well, here's that last name. But it could also mean this completely different thing, because it could be that there was a German last name that was very similar. Someone was mentioning Schmidt that got changed to Smith, right? And it could be something similar that actually had a different meaning in the other language, but that they anglicized it and just picked this very common English name to move it into. But the actual origin of their name had a different meaning. It's different,
completely different.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's talk about, we'll kind of go through it as Albion C goes through it. And he starts off with the Puritans, the people that, come into Massachusetts and really settle that whole New England area, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, maybe, down into Connecticut, some. So this culture kind of goes into particular parts of the rest of the United States. They have really interesting pockets where these things go. The technical term for names and people names here is onomastics. So we're studying onomastics. You can put that as your $15 word for next week. You can bring that out and impress everyone. One of the different aspects is how the names progress through a family. So a lot of times first names we think of, there's different ways of giving first names to children. So many children today, there's an idea where they'll just randomly come up with some interesting variation of a name. I think XYZ would be an interesting name, and they just kind of, it's out of nowhere. There isn't a lot of that going in the 18th century. There's a little bit of that, but most of the time, names are based on fathers' names, or possibly grandparents' names, or possibly godparents. Sometimes names are pulled from biblical sources. So we have Bible names. We have names possible of names of saints. or names of kings, or there are hortatory names, which are names that exhort. So we'll talk about that. Puritans weren't big into hortatory names, at least not in North America. Was it?
Yeah, back in England,
Right.
They would have. Was it? I'm trying to remember who it was, the Puritans or the Quakers.
I think it's Puritan.
I think so. And that they would, it was one of the interesting distinctions he drew, because a
Right.
lot of times it's mirrored very closely, but you'd see those names back in England, but they didn't make
Right.
make it over the Atlantic. They didn't
Right.
really, there wasn't, I think it was less than 4% over here.
Right. So the Puritans are mostly, their traditions are coming from the East Anglian Puritans. There was a set of like Sussex Puritans. They really went for hortatory names, which would be something like "be good." You know, they would name somebody. Do we have some other examples here? Yeah, here we go. Be courteous, Cole, or fight the good fight of the faith, White. That's a long first name. Humiliation, Scratcher. I mean, those names are so interesting. I wish they were more popular because they're so fun.
I think that, of course, if your name was Fight the Good Fight, people would, of course, call you Fight for
Right,
short, which would be
it just shortened up the fight. So we've got this hortatory names, but the Puritans generally, I mean, as a big generalization, would probably go more with biblical names than the other groups. So they're going to have, let's see, but only certain biblical names, not just any biblical name. Don't know. John, Joseph, Samuel, and Josiah. So specifically biblical names with characteristics that they were trying to inculcate. So even just like with hortatory names, when they were naming their children, they wanted those children to show those same traits that people in the past showed. So one of the names that you don't see on this list is David. Now, the Puritans, they didn't think David was a very good character. I mean, yeah, God after man's own, a man after God's own heart, but he was a real screw up. So they're like, no, we're not going to use David that much. And other names they didn't care for. Moses, I'm not sure why they were not with Moses. Adam, again, the fall, why we don't want Adam. Abraham, Solomon, I don't think they were a big fan of Solomon. Interestingly enough, Paul, even though they were very into the Pauline texts and all that, Paul wasn't one of the names they really went with. Jesus, you don't see that being used as a name. Angel or Emmanuel. So they didn't want to, or like Michael, who was an angel, right? So they weren't going to use those kind of names because they thought that's not appropriate for a man, not appropriate for a son. So girl names, let's see, 50% of the girls, I like that, 50% of the 17th century girls that were Puritans were named Mary, Elizabeth, or Sarah. That's it. It was, I mean, I guess it's easy. We'll just pick that. Let's see. Children were generally named after mothers and fathers, right? So girls were named after mothers and boys' fathers, and not as much grandparents, and certainly not godparents. That really wasn't.
And we'll see very different meaning. The names are passed down very differently in the other cultures.
Right. Very interesting. I had never thought about this. Of course, in modern day situations, we don't have the child mortality issues that they had in the 18th century. So, they had just massive child mortality, especially at particular kind of punctuated times where you would get a epidemic of, was it diphtheria?
Oh, he did say what it was. I don't know.
Well, he just said a throat distemper. He was talking about a particular one, but I think that was diphtheria, where, just basically you might have 5 children and they all would die within a couple of months. So one of the things that's happening here in the time period is the concept of necronyms and the reusing of names of children that had died. So you might have a son, you'd name him John, he might die of throat distemper, and you would name the next son John again, like you're just trying to make that name work for you. There was at least one example he noted in the book of a particular father who had, I think he'd tried out the name twice, and both of them died, and he was like, okay, I'm going to try this one more time, but after that, I would never name anybody this name. It was just like, they felt it was, unlucky. So we've got the very interesting concept of necronyms and that reusing of names. It says here, the name of children who had died were used again in 80% of all cases where another baby was born of the same sex. That is
and
incredible.
it certainly gives you a different idea of what they considered the first name as being.
Right.
More
important.
like, and if you connect it to that idea of kind of them like gifting them a trait through their name that's connected to the name, and that if you wanted to give that name and what's associated with it as a gift, you wouldn't feel like giving it again
was a bad thing.
Right. So, but we think of names as very different. So it wouldn't occur to us.
I'm not sure. I'm sure some people, grip onto what's going on with the name very importantly. But I think most people are like, well, I kind of picked things out because I thought that was fun, or I liked the sound of it, not this name means something and it's going to change this person's life. Which, in a sense, haven't you ever run into people and, their name is something and you're like, that's not them?
It doesn't stick in my head. They're like, well, I didn't agree. I didn't think that was the right name for them.
That's not the right name for that person. So that's what's going on with the Puritans. Just some quick bullet points on them. The next one was the Virginians, and they were Anglican, much more royalty oriented, because they were royalists basically, and the reason why they came to Virginia is because they were kicked out of Puritan England at the time, and so they've got a different kind of structure going on. This again is the south and the west of England, and the names of the children tend to be, there's some biblical names, but they're much more likely, especially like the sons, to be named after Teutonic warriors, Frankish knights, and English kings. So we get names like Edward and George and Charles and, William. We get these, super strong names. So the Puritans definitely not with those kinds of names. And here we are in Virginia in a whole different set of names. Favorites: William, Robert, Richard, Edward, George, and Charles. And the daughters named after Christian saints who do not appear in the Bible or traditional English folk names. So Margaret, Jane, Catherine, Frances, Alice. Those are like 17th and 18th century classic names. They still had a popularity of some of those super, popular names of Mary, Elizabeth, Anne, and Sarah. So those are apparently for girls, they're always popular. And if you ever look at the name chart, if you just pick John and Mary, they're like, there it is. They're always popular. John and Mary are just constantly, especially if you look in like the 1880s, it just, is everyone named Mary? There's no other choice. In fact, maybe if you have multiple girls, he's like, well, let's marry one and marry two,
Well, and people have been bringing up the fact that, especially now, or maybe not even especially, that it's very common to kind of use the middle name as sometimes as a backup or as a way to incorporate a family name when the first name was something new. Or I feel like in some cases people will use like a last name from farther back in the family and move it in as a middle name to kind of keep it in the family.
Right.
But it was making me think of the fact that an awful lot of people, at least on the Townsend side of our family, use their middle names. Like there's 3 or 4 different people who that was just the name they went by all their life.
Dan goes by his middle name. And,
you know, grandma, her mom, you know, just it's a very, very common thing to do sometimes. And it's kind of nice to have 2 names, you know, use one as a backup.
You know, he doesn't talk about middle names.
He doesn't. He does
In fact,
not.
I'm not sure he ever mentions.
Makes you curious about it.
Yes. Here we have this study of middle names. It needs a special scientific word for it, like onomastics.
He probably has
it's
one.
a middle anyway, I'm not even going to say it because I'm not sure what the Latin for middle is. Anyway, my Latin isn't that good. So the Anglicans are definitely different from that. The firstborn children were named after grandparents instead of parents. Again, this is very generalized. It's fun to use this information in one direction. It doesn't work so well the other direction. If you say, you know, okay, my name is John, so therefore, that, you know, that isn't true. But, you know, you can look at it backwards and say, why did my grandparents name, you know, this name this way? You know, then it gives you the information kind of going that direction. So it's easier to go from. Anyway, I don't know. So, firstborn children named after grandparents, secondborn after parents. Interesting. Okay. The use of surnames as forenames to reinforce connections. So you might use like, does he mean like maiden, like mother's maiden last name used as a first name?
I'm sorry, read it again for me what you said.
It's the use of surnames as forenames.
Oh, right.
Right. So I think you would see that there, like they're trying to keep the family name.
Yeah.
So it's like you know, my mother's name would be, you know, Smith, and so you would call the child's first name Smith.
Yes.
Along with your regular last name. So you've got some of these interesting things going on with the naming and the intermingling of families and kind of keeping that family name alive. Mostly used for boys in that case, but not unknown for girls. Godparents often closely involved in the name choice. So the other thing is who's helping you choose the name? And that's part of the custom here, not just what name gets picked, but why. Do other people get to choose? You know, does just the mother decide? Does the mother and father decide? Grandparents decide? In some of these, it's very much a community thing. It's like, no. So we're going to see that as we go later on. So in this case, godparents are there involved in the naming choice. And there's also some, with this set of folks in the 17th century, there was some magical properties or consultation in what's going on with the names. So attempting to find fortunate or lucky names for people. And so that's happening within this culture too. And there's some of that. There's, you know, in the 17th and 18th century, there's certainly a little bit more magical thinking going on than we might think. Not religious thinking, but magical thinking. Like there's astrology going on here, and you know, lucky numbers, and that is part of this particular culture that's coming in. Now, I may not talk about it a lot, but you'll see that, and even some like books that are specifically geared toward kind of lucky numbers and things like that. So that's Virginia, and the Anglicans, or Royalist maybe is what we could use it as another term. Then there's the Quakers, and they're in that Delaware Valley area, you know, let's say, you know, Pennsylvania. We've got Philadelphia specifically. We got parts of New Jersey, they would call West Jersey, in that clump. and their culture is very different, and it definitely has some if they're going south, we're going north, kind of ideas about their culture. So they don't even have godparents. That isn't a thing, and they're not interested in that kind of thing. They don't do christening. They don't do baptisms. All those are like, throw that all those concepts out. The infant name is selected by the parent and certified, or helped along by the whole church aspect, the friends. It's like the elders of the church are like, well, maybe not that name. You should think again. You should. What's your second choice? Kind of a thing going on there. And that naming concept is sort of witnessed, and it is entered in the book of the meeting. So it is very, very important to that whole. They're looking at that whole process. It's just not a willy-nilly thing. Just like with their marriage, you don't just like, I'm going to marry this person. That's not how it worked. You're gonna talk to the whole church, and they're gonna say, okay, it's okay for you. They're of the right kind of, or not. So there was probably a lot of that. The name. Named firstborn after the grandparents, but honored maternal and paternal lines evenly handed. And then we'll find here that they will crisscross their names.
I thought that was very interesting.
Right. It's like, okay, it's a boy, so we're going to name it for the mother's grandfather's first name. Mm-hmm. And then the girl for the father's grandmother's name. Mm-hmm. So they would do this kind of
and at times, like it was so purposeful that you knew that they had done it. They had absolutely thought it through. It didn't always follow that pattern, but it was enough to know that it was a pattern they would follow at times.
Right. So there's some very, very interesting interweaving of those lines. They had popular forenames that were John and Joseph and Samuel. Popular women, or female girls' forenames, Mary, Elizabeth, Sarah, but also, is this one Anna, Hannah, or
I think Anna or Anna or Hannah.
Or
so
Hannah,
they're all variations of the same.
Right. Or,
and that's Esther and Hester too.
Right,
they're both
right. Esther or Hester as being names, right? And their naming practices were basically exactly the same as the naming practices of the Quakers over in England, in the North Midlands, or the North and the Midlands. There you go. And then the last group, and these are put in order by the time that they come into the North American context. So the Scots-Irish and the backcountry folk are coming in like, let's say 1820 and 1720 and later. These other groups came in the 17th century. And they have a kind of a mix of some of these. It's a little kind of scattered, right? But classically with these border areas, a little more militaristic in their naming concepts. So they still like John, like everyone else. John is the go-to. But they like Robert and Richard, border saints like Andrew, Patrick, and David. There's this example. So comparing that first name, Patrick, with the other groups. No undergraduate was named Patrick at Harvard, Massachusetts, from 1636 to 1820. So here it is, it's a popular backcountry name, but it is so not popular for the Puritans that it's like, get real, it just doesn't exist. But yet it's the fourth most popular name on the military muster rolls in the 18th century. So they're signing up to be soldiers, but they certainly are never getting into Harvard. They also use Celtic names like Ewan, Owen, Barry, and Roy, or Scandinavian and strange Teutonic names like Archibald and Ronald, Scottish kings, Alexander, Charles, James, warrior names, Wallace, Bruce, Percy, Howard. And we also have sometimes the naming of people by the place they have, not just our last name, but sometimes even their first name. So let's see, passage was, and they're doing similar name passing as the Virginians. First son named after the grandfather, and second son after the father. And they cultivated, as it says here, a spirit of onomastic individualism. And that's where the names just, you're like, let's just make up something that's interesting. And then there's a quote from somebody from the 1940s. When my mother saw I looked like my father, she made a girl's name out of the family name of Hoyt and called me Hoyette. And then when I named my own girls, I wanted the names that no one ever had and that the names that nobody would ever want. I like, that's the funniest part. So I made them up. Norvetta, Urdith, Artheta, Marilyn, and Wilburine. Or Walberine. No, it's Wilburine.
That is the one. I just kept reading it and kept wondering how you would pronounce that one.
Yeah, it's Wilburine. One of the names that popped up, I was thinking about all these names and how, they're names that we say today that no one would ever name their child today. I mean, very few people are going to name their child Bertha, right? But it's like, wait a minute. This used to be popular. Why was it popular? And you look up Bertha, and it means the bright one. And it's like, well, that's a great name. It's just, it just doesn't sound very pleasant to our ears.
Well, Dad was also mentioning that if you say it with not a Midwest accent, if you say it with more of a, European accent,
German
sounds way better.
It's like, oh, well, there you go. Yeah, no wonder. It's a Bertha or something like that, so much better. So, we've got some of these being now some of these have to do with if we get away from first names, we go to last names. But let's stop. Just stop right there. Do you want to jump in with anything before?
Okay, sure. Yes. So there was a super chat right at the very beginning from Mandatory Carrie. Working today, but I will try to make it. Thank you. And then there is a super chat from Chicken Slapper. This is a wonderful channel for learning history. Thank you for everything you guys do.
Chicken Slapper. Mm-hmm. So now this brings up a topic just right here, is that we get a chance, like on YouTube, right? You get a chance to make up your own name, right? As children, we don't get to make up our own name. Sometimes later on in life, we'll choose a middle name, or we will, go with a nickname or something like that, just to adjust it, because we don't want to be stuck with that identity. I'm not sure what's going on there, but our social media environment allows us many times to sort of make up our identity, and that truly is so important that we generally don't just come up with that out of thin air. It's like no, I want it to be, something I enjoy, or whatever, macaroni gluer. I want to be and that's
right.
That is
something describing a character that, and that's almost occupational.
Yes,
right?
I was just going to say that's occupational.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we're going to be talking about, last names. But anyway, so any more things you need to jump in with? Okay, so. Every week I try to get to brand new and renewing YouTube members and new Patreon folks. Sorry I leave out you old Patreon folks, because you're just so good. You've been just continuing to support us for all this time. So thank you. Anyway, so new and renewing YouTube members, Fire Oyster, David Collar, because we see him all the time. Thank you, David. Ice Cream Paint JB. Linda Nagini, George Saraceno, Carrie Senseni, Laurel Tucker, and Hillary Amon. And then brand new Patreon, Jack Pliska. So there we go. We got those people. Again, super thank you for your support. Before I go on to last names, I have the list here of the top names from that naming website that uses the Social Security. So the oldest set is 1880, and here are the top 20 boy names in 1880, and you can, we can kind of, lock these out. This is probably that. This is probably that, right? So John could be anybody. That's the most popular. William is second. So not a Puritan name, but could be more likely a Cavalier name, Virginia, or backcountry. James.
Could also be king.
Biblical name. It's
both.
either. It could be for a king or it could be the apostle. Apostle. So it could basically anybody might be interested in James. George. That's a king name, so it's not as likely to be Puritan. Charles, same thing. Frank. What do you think about Frank?
Teutonic?
Yeah, it's probably Teutonic, right?
Probably.
Joseph. So there's multiple Josephs we could kind of run with, but maybe not Joseph, Mary, this
Old Testament, New Testament.
Right.
You got
Yeah,
choices, right?
I think the Puritans like the Old Testament Joseph, not so much, it's like the New Testament Joseph. I don't know. Henry, I am not sure where we go with Henry. Robert, so that's more warrior-like,
I'd
certainly.
say Henry would be the king's name.
Maybe,
From
a king
from
name.
the list of the king's
Right.
names.
Robert, warrior kind of name. Thomas, I'm not sure about Thomas, biblical, apostle, but I don't know.
Oh, saint's name, right?
Saint's
Could
name,
be
yeah.
either
Mhm,
one.
Yeah. Edward, that's a king name, so there we go. Harry, I thought it was weird that they put Harry here. It wasn't. It's as
Yes.
not Harrison or anything like that. It's Harry, which even Harrison brings up that concept of using a surname for a forname. So sometimes you will
Yes.
bring that surname forward and use it as and Harris' son, is really a surname, not a thing. So anyway, Walter. Arthur, Fred, Albert, Samuel, probably, biblical. Clarence, I'm not sure about. Louis, sounds kind of French to me. And then David. Girls' names, Mary, Anna, that's two, the first two, Mary, and then Anna, and then Emma, and then Elizabeth, and then we move down into Margaret, which probably, more squeezes one into the other one. This one I thought was the most fascinating one, and I wonder if it's sort of pop cultural. Minnie.
Yeah.
Minnie. Why was that popular in the 1880s? I do not know. Ida, Bertha, Clara, Alice, Anne with an IE, Florence, Bessie, Grace, Ethel, Sarah, Ella, Martha, Nellie, and Mabel. Well, where did Mabel come from?
Yeah, to me, the girls' names
Right.
were
They
felt very different. They
Right.
weren't as classic.
Yeah.
In my mind, not what I associated with classic names. In contrast to the boys' names, which
Right.
almost all of
Seem-
them did feel very in
kinda
line with what I
lockstep.
expected.
Boom, yeah.
Yes, but then we got to the girls' names, and you're like, I would like,
Yeah.
especially Minnie. That told me through
Yeah.
me.
And why it's way up there at 6.
I
Not.
was very surprised.
It's like, okay, that's interesting. If you've got thoughts on that, just jump in that chatter box and go for it. So let's talk a little bit about surnames, the last name of folks. And we've got patronymic. Tell us what that means.
So this is, you're just named after your father. So this would be, I think there's a slide for this one. You want to see if you can find that one, Ivy? All these are occupational. So yeah, that's the one. So go ahead. This one, so these are like top names, like in the top 100 names as surnames. And of course you have the Johnson, maybe Davis. Davis had a couple different threads that it could have been, Wilson, Anderson, Jackson. Martin was a little fuzzier too, but Thompson, Harris, I think Harris was from like Henry and Harry, coming in, and like you're just named, you're like, yep, this is Will Williamson, right?
Right. So the father's name is John, the son's name is John's son, and it turns into Johnson.
And his name might be John Johnson.
Right, John Johnson. No. Oh no.
Now, I was reading, and it was talking about how, in a particular time, I actually forget which particular time frame it was, but they were talking about how in Spain, this would happen, but it wouldn't be a family name that followed the person down. Each individual son would be named. They would have their own name, and then they would have their father's name added on. Mm-hmm. And so it would change. The family name was not continuous. It would just change with each son. Right. Which
we're not just like,
nope,
that's not what we do.
It's not how I think about it.
And why, that's where these surnames come from.
Yes.
So what happened before there were surnames?
Right, where they get frozen in time.
Right. We don't think that it's like, there was a time when it's like, what do you have more than one name? Mm-hmm. It's like, well, I'm John and then I'm Townsend. What does that mean? Why do you have this second name? Why do you have a middle name? What happens if you're just, that's just John? But the problem is like, well, we've got 7 Johns in town. What do we call them? John 1, 2, 3, 4, And so you have to come up with that surname. And so you have these patronymic ones where it's like John, Jack's son. And we see that like, in the Bible, you'll say, Elijah, son of da-da-da-da, and they'll do the whole, like almost the whole, lineage going backwards, son of this, son of that, son of that, son of that, so that you know which one you're talking about. We also have local surnames that have to do with where they live, possibly. So it's likely, and that might be in a micro way or a macro way. So maybe your name, you use the town, a larger kind of situation, or maybe it's a little piece of town, like John who lives at Atwood, or John who lives at the end of town, John Townsend, or same.
Well,
way.
One of the very common ones was Lee, and Lee was the English word for meadow or clearing in a forest. And so I did not know it was a word for that, but there you go. If it's and there were a couple different variations, so Lee or Leigh. So there's different ones that could kind of connect to the same word.
Surnames of office. So you got an example of surnames of office?
That would be more like chamberlain or deacon or knight, or maybe I would say yeoman would probably fit in here, or the different one, or actually maybe even farmer, because the list that was talking about it was saying that farmer, when it became a surname, the word farmer was referring to someone who collected taxes, right? So now we associate with someone who farms the land, but then they're like, well, the people who farmed the land were renting it and they were paying taxes. And so that's where the two words are linked back all the way back there.
Yeah.
And
Wouldn't you like your last name to be tax collector?
Right? Wouldn't that be delightful? And carry it down through the generations.
Yeah. And then we have occupational surnames, and we're very familiar with this. And you've got town and country kind of separated here.
The book
Because
that
we're-
was written in 1850, he broke it out that way.
Really?
He's like, well, these are the occupations in the country, and these are the occupations in the town. I thought it was
Very interesting.
fun.
So we got some slides on classic occupational surnames, right? So jump into that for me, Ivy. So obviously you see there are a lot of them. This is just the first slide. Abbott, Alderman, Archer, Arkwright, Aerosmith. I mean, those are just such neat names. Bowman, Carter is a classic one. We don't think of that. You know, we hear the word Carter, but we don't think about someone with a cart who's like Porter, who's, you know, moving things around. Chambers, there's Chamberlain you put in here, which might be more of the office.
Yes.
And Chancellor, but Chandler, someone who's selling things. Cheeseman, it's like, I make cheese. Clark, Clarkson, Collier, never really thought about Collier, but you know, somebody who's bringing up coal, Crafts, copper, you know, all this, just, Earl. I wonder what's going on with Earl.
Right. Some of them, I never can tell whether they, whether there's a deeper reason,
Right.
or whether it can have multiple different meanings, right? So the origins
Right.
can be from different places.
Right. And some of them you're like, okay, Kellogg?
Yes.
You know, how does Kellogg, but that turns out to be what, a hog butcher?
Yeah, a pig butcher.
Pig butcher.
Specifically, just pigs.
Right. You know, I only butcher pigs. You know, Jagger might actually be from Jaeger, hunter in German, or maybe it's something else, depending on, you know, Mercer. I mean, so many of these, we just, you know, we see them as a name, but we don't go back and figure out. It's like, wait, no, that's because somebody back there in those lines did that thing. Like Baker, you know.
Oh, are we on the, this has Six Smith, and so the SIX Smith, and this was for people specifically who made sickles or scythes.
Smith. Yeah.
And so it's specifically associated with that, which I was a little disappointed that our name is a geographic name instead of being an occupation. And in fact, I looked up different ones. So like, you know, mom's maiden name, grandma's maiden name, and they're all mostly geographic.
All right.
From the ones
area,
in our family group.
Whether it's from a town or from a part of town or you know. Shaver, Shepherd, Roper. It's like, yeah, somebody did all these things. Taverner, yeah. Wright, Wheelwright, Wheeler, Weber. You can just like, oh, he's John the Tinker. He tinkers, he fixes things.
Right, and of course all of these are English based, but
but it happens in
a while back
German
I was looking
names
up, and it was a German last name, and I looked up the meaning, and there it was stonemason,
right?
And I did not recognize it because it was in
Right.
German, but it was an occupational name that was just based in a different language.
So and apparently a lot of this, since you know the surname formation happened with at least in the English context right around when they did the Doomsday Book, right? So what was the date for the Doomsday Book?
I think, hold on, it's early.
So maybe it was just just almost a factoid of record keeping. It's like, well, we're gonna have to make some records. So
Right, like, well, this
what's your
is-
last name again?
Right, this is John Green. He
what do you
lives next
do?
to the Green.
Yeah, okay, that's your last name, because we got to put it in the book.
This was 1086.
There we go.
So
So right there in that time frame. So fascinating. Now I don't have anything. Tell me about nicknames.
okay, so first here's a super chat from Max Arcole.
Yes.
Sometimes online names are decades old and we keep hanging on to them. Envious chicken slapper just now, or were just a name not already used, or because 30 years ago you were a diehard for a computer brand. It cringes. And I do think that's very funny because every once in a while, when you're doing somebody, like when I'm working in customer service, you'll see an email and you're like, aha, this this is an early email because
it's going to AOL.
right? Because they were much more eclectic early on, and people chose things that they really enjoyed. And then later on, people learned that it's just best to do a variation of your name. It's easier to spell. And
Yeah, well, and it's easier to know who you're talking to, right?
yeah,
It's like, oh,
but like I enjoy the diversity of the original ones.
yeah, it's a fun thing. We were having fun with it.
We were.
We've lost all the fun.
So, and like that feeds into he was talking, one of the books that I was looking at was a book from 1815, and he divides up the names by the patronymic ones and the occupational, town, country. And then there's a particular section, and geographic names. And then there's a section where he's talking about nicknames. And he's describing that the idea that even though it wasn't a name that was given to you at birth, that there's a lot of names that get attached to people as they go along through life. And that he was making...
And you can't choose your own nickname.
That's right.
Other people choose the nickname for you.
That's very true.
I think that is an important thing. It's like, no, wait a minute. These names, you don't pick your names, your parents pick your names, and you don't pick your nickname. It comes from people calling you that. It's almost like you can't nickname yourself.
No.
That's just it's not right. I'm super strong, and then they'll call you, oh, that's weakling, somebody, right? You just don't do it. Don't do it because you can't enforce your own nickname. They can enforce the nickname on you.
Well, and it tells you something about someone. And he was making a joke. He was talking about it, and he's like, it could be that the name Short might have been a joke about someone who was tall. Right? Because don't worry, they had a sense of humor too, right? And so he was kind of, and you could tell that some of the stuff that he was connecting to names, he was making an educated guess about them. And in another section of the book, he was recounting a joke, and it doesn't have to do with nicknames, but he was recounting a joke about names, and it was... There was a woman who had died, and she had left 10 pounds in her will to someone if they would give her a eulogy that didn't say anything mean about her. And she hadn't had a good reputation. And so the guy who was doing the eulogy said, all I can tell you is that she lived her life well because she was born well, she married well, she lived well, and she died well. And it's because the places, they were all connected to places that ended in the word well. So she married in Brideswell and lived in Cheswell. And clearly he was having fun with the pun.
Yes, her only well-led life had to do with her location, not her herself. So yeah, fascinating stuff about nicknames. And did you put a link to that 1815 book?
I don't think so. I can't, hold on, let me see if I did. No, I didn't. I'll try to add it in later.
So we have last names that might be patronymic, related to the father, locative, having to do with the location, occupational, we talked about that, or characteristic, right?
Somebody was, I think the only one that I ran across in because I was looking through the top really popular names. I didn't get through all of them. But in the first 25, the Brown as the last name was one that they weren't connecting to a location or someone's name. They
complexion?
From the ones that they had been able to trace back, it was like someone named after the color of clothes they wore, someone named after their hair color, someone named after their complexion. So it could be different ones, but that it was characteristic based for Brown.
So there are probably more of those, and we just don't, click.
Well, and I do feel like that for a lot of names, there's probably more origins.
Oh yeah.
That for a lot of the names, 80% of the origin is the one that is referred to, but that there's quite a few that came from a different branch of how that name got created.
There were some other, I mean, I want to touch on these because they're outside of English, and we haven't, touched on that a whole lot. So, Geiger, meaning a fiddle player, which
I
is
liked that one.
fiddle playing in Germany. And Hutcooper, buyer of wood, which, sometimes we'll see these words and we just don't really, connect to them up too much. We just take the last name as it's a last name. That's all it is. But it has meaning, right? Kohler, so a charcoal burner or charcoal seller. Koopman, a merchant. Again, there's Jaeger up here in Germany, means hunter. And there's and that's just German, right? We have all these other ones that are like either Scottish or Polish or French that come into what we do. Who's like Michael Dragoo's name is like a French name. I can't remember what it means. I ran into somebody who was Bollinger, right? And that's like French for baker. So there's a bunch of different fun names that we run into all the time, and we don't think about, hooking it back to the occupation or the location or whatever it is. Okay, I think I'm out of talking. I'll let you guys chat.
So here in this one, it's saying that dragoo, there's a couple different ones. So it could be dragod, which could mean to carry, or it could be power and authority. So it could be like Carter, or it could have a different origin. And then over here, there's a super chat from Speed and Style Tony. Native American naming is interesting, using a trait or an event of that person's life. So, and that is a lot closer to a nickname, not necessarily a name given at birth, but something you kind of grow into.
Or a characteristic name or whatever, right?
Right.
And that reminds me, I mean, we didn't touch on it at all, but place naming is very, very interesting. And he talks about the naming of places here, like counties. Why do in Virginia, you've got all these counties that are named after, royalty kind of things. And in other parts, they will hold with Native American names. Mm-hmm. So some of the cultures were very much like, let's fold in these Native American names for the places. Don't have any problem with that. And other places, nope, we're not going to do that. We're going to give them names of places where we came from, or characteristics, or whatever. So even the places kind of get the same treatment, and or rivers, or whatever like that.
And it is, I think even maybe more so than people's names, the place names around us, we may not know the history of, and it's very fun to dig into.
Yeah, or I just say, Pearston. Oh, it's an old Indian name.
So one of the things I noticed was, one of the articles I was reading about names was giving the different descriptions for how the name origins happened for different cultures as they were coming into North America. And so it kind of was doing it by time period, because of course we start out with English and then we move on, and you'll have waves of other immigrants. You have Irish and you have German, and one of them was for Russia. And Russia was, I think, the only one I noticed who had as one of the kind of batches people being named after animals, which I thought was delightful. And
so first name, last name?
I think it was specifically last names that they were referencing in that one.
Yeah.
So here's a super chat from Sean, from Eric Barlow, that says, Sean actually means old in Scots Gaelic. The grandfather would be called Sean Robert, and the grandson Big, or Little, right? Big Robert, which I think, well, and I was, there's the last name Brown, and then there's the last name White. And so, was it for someone with white hair? And then I was wondering if it was for someone who was tow-headed, because, Ryan came into the store, and there are very few people who have pale enough blonde hair that I know, who you might call them white, but there are, there are some, and that they have pale enough hair that you wouldn't call it.
Isn't it funny? Edgar Winter, and his brother, they were like almost albinos or just white hair, very white. So anyway, are we there?
I think so. There were a lot of questions, and I loved seeing everybody's comments. Unfortunately, there were a lot of very unique, names that they hadn't been able to trace. And alas, we couldn't trace them either. Because, as you can find, a lot of names did get anglicized, and that means they could have very unusual origins.
Right.
So, but I loved hearing about
spelling
everybody.
splits up and does strange things, and it can get confused with English names, or when they anglicize them. So. Are we
Okay,
there?
I think we're good.
The last name means bathroom vanity or cabinet. Okay. There are some interesting names out there. That is for sure. And they all meant something to those people. They all had meaning, or else it's like, we just call that's kid 4, and then the one after that was kid 5. They don't do that. So names mean something, and they still mean something today, although maybe we just aren't as cognizant or thinking about it as much. I want to thank everyone for coming into the Nutmeg Tavern today. Special thank you to our direct supporters who support us through membership, through Patreon. Oh, and Patreon and people on Discord. Make sure to watch that space, because there's going to be some just crazy cool merch coming out. Anyway, super thank you to all those folks, and I hope you have a tremendous weekend. It was such a beautiful day out today. I hope you have as nice a weather as we do and a great weekend. Thank you for watching.